Oh, no, mai haere mai, ko Craig Young tokonga. Great to see you here. My name is Craig Young. I'm the CEO of TUANZ, the Technology Users Association. I'm here in that capacity, but also we're part of DECA, the Digital Equity Coalition, and have been since the beginning. So really pleased to be here with Vic today. Um, we are really interested to hear from you today. So I'm going to hand over to Vic in a sec, and she's going to take you through just how we're going to do the webinar and how you can interact with us and get us some questions. So, Vic, why don't you do that for us today?
So kia ora koutou ko Victoria MacLennan toko ingoa, but please call me Vic. And I am one of the DECA co-chairs and have been working in this mahi for many, many years. And you've all seen my face before, most probably, so I won't bore you too much with all of that. Chris couldn't be with us today, but says to say kia ora koutou to everyone here. Um, First of all, I just want to thank everyone who has filled in our survey, and we will be putting the link to the survey in the chat section for you. If you haven't had an opportunity to fill in the survey, then please do that. And what we're going to do today is Craig's going to spend a bit of time setting the scene. I'm going to run through the survey results as we've got them now. And then Leala is going to talk to us from a lived experience perspective and what she's hearing in her community at the moment. And then we're going to have a bit of a wrap and talk about next steps and what's going to come next. But what we will do throughout is if you post things in the chat function, we will try and address those as we go. So it's kind of a bit of a fluid model for today. So back to you, Craig, to do a bit of scene setting for us.
Oh, kia ora. I just realised I haven't used these headphones for a long time, and I realise I look like a bit like a Cyberman, if you know the Doctor Who thing. So, being a big Doctor Who fan, can I just before I start, because I've got some slides I want to run through, just remind you who TUANZ is. We're the Technology Users Association, so we don't represent any industry. While there are industry players as members of the association, we speak for users. So that's why it's important that we're involved and engaged with this mahi as well, because it's affecting users obviously. So let me share my window slides, just because I thought you don't want to keep looking at my face all the way through. So today I'm just going to take you through some background information around what is actually happening, just to get us all on the same page. So some of it you'll already know, some of it you may not, and some of it might just be my perspective and opinion, because I'm known to have opinions when it comes to some of these things. So yes, so we're talking about 3G. So I think it's important to recognize the fact that we've done this before, that the old 025 network, now that was a non-GSMA network, so GSM network. You'll remember that the networks were different. Telecom had quite a different network from Vodafone at the time, and so you couldn't take your handsets from one organisation to another, for example. You had to switch your handsets. And when they turned the 025 network on and turned on 027, they were using that number range. I wonder how many of us can remember the disaster that they had when they started that network. And I think they had Richard Hammond advertising the new network. I think it was the XT network. And then so everybody that had a telecom handset had to switch out. And then in March 2018, 2degrees turned off their 2G network and moved to 3G. It's been a bit funny. Vodafone and now One have um, left their 2G network on, not for use by handsets, but for use by devices. So they're in a little bit of an interesting different situation. So the three mobile network operators, so we only have three in New Zealand, three, and we call them MNOs, mobile network operators. They're the ones that own the networks. They announced they're turning off 3G by the end of the year. So who are the players in the shutdown? Well, obviously the three MNOs, the mobile network operators, are 2degrees, Spark, and One. And they all run GSM 3G networks. You take shared devices, you can take your device between the three of them. But there are two other players I just want to pick out. Skinny is an example of a virtual operator, or if you want to use the short term MVNO. So basically, they are a different brand selling a different service, but they're on the Spark network. And they have other ones like Digital Island. There are a few other, the Warehouse Group has their own mobile network, but that's off the 1.nz. Sorry, no, I think that one's off the 2 Degrees network. What I'm saying is that it doesn't matter which mobile service you have, they're all going to be impacted because they have to run on one of those three networks. And then the TCF, or the Telecommunications Forum, represents all the telecommunications, well, no, sorry, represents the telecommunications companies. And in this case, they do represent those three. So they are trying to bring together a combined story. So I just wanted to talk about who they are. So you've got 2 Degrees, Spark, and One. So why are they doing this? And it was a really simple screen because there's only two reasons that they're really doing this. One is cost. Because they're now investing in 5G networks and new ones are coming on along, they're already talking about 6G. You need to switch something off because a network costs you money to run, even and it's been declining. So they want to be able to turn that network off. The second reason is spectrum. Now, spectrum is simply just radio waves. And the way these networks work is they all work in different parts of the spectrum. Think of it as a highway with multiple lanes. And what they want to do, and so you've got very few cars going down the 3G lane. Most of us are heading down the 4G lanes, and a few of us on the 5G lanes. They want to shut that 3G lane off because it's not being used very much. And what they can do is then repurpose that lane into a 4G or a 5G lane. That won't happen immediately. It could happen further down the track, but it then gives them more lanes in uh, the other area. That's a very simple way of talking about spectrum. I mean, it's physics if you really want to go into it. I don't understand it. That's why I use the highway. But those are really the only two reasons, in my view, why they are doing this. And when are they doing it? So I actually went back out to them last week and formally asked each one of them, when are you switching your network off? 2 Degrees said by the end of the year. So I went back and said, well, that's not very good. What's your exact date? And they said, by the end of the year. So I'm picking, they'll leave it to the 31st of December, but they haven't given us a date. 1NZ are clear, they're switching off their 3G network on the 31st of December. And Spark have extended. There was a media release recently. They're not switching theirs off until the 31st of March 2026. So it is something that's going to happen in the next 6 to 9 months. And Vic can talk for DECA, but for example, TUANZ, we're not pushing for any further extensions because it is something that they want to do. It is something they're well within their rights of doing. It is something that we, over the longer term, will support because we want people on the latest technology if we can. And yes, I know that brings all sorts of other issues, which we'll talk about as we go. So what are they doing? What are they actually doing to talk to people? So first of all, the mobile network operators say they are talking directly to their impacted customers. And we'll hear a little bit more about how effective that is. They do have some device, what's called whitelists, so they know the devices that should work. Um, and the TCF itself is trying to be this centralized source of key consumer information. So they launched 2 weeks ago this website called 3gshutdown.co.nz. I think we should put that in the chat. And you'll see on the right-hand side there an example of a banner that they are starting to run a public campaign. And I've seen it around Auckland and a few places up on the big screens. The thing they're really pushing is this free text to 550. So if you text 3G on your phone to 550, it will tell you whether your phone works or not. And that's their big play. They want you to text it, find out if you're fine, no worries. They want you to, if you do have an issue, they want you to go and store. And we'll talk about what that means a little bit later as well, and what sort of experience people are getting. So what's the impact? So 3G, honestly, the usage of that is declining. I looked at some Spark notes. I've got it here. Only 2% of their network data traffic travels over 3G, and calls have reduced by 85%. The big change, and this is why there's a big issue by turning 3G off. 3G, when it launched, when you made a phone call, the voice service was going over the 2G network. And then when 4G came along, the voice would switch back to 3G. So when you make a call on the older 3G phones, um, older 4G phones, gosh, it gets confusing, doesn't it? Older 4G phones, the voice call was actually going over the 3G network until they switched on this thing called VoLTE, Voice over LTE, long-term evolution. So that's true 4 and 5G voice. So new phones, your voice call goes over the 4 or 5G network, but your older ones drop to the 3G. And that is one of the big issues. So it's not just about devices that you think are 3G, that are already 4G, you think you're okay, but they may not have this capacity. And we know there are some Xiaomi handsets out there that are currently not VoLTE capable, and they've promised an update. And we'll talk about that later too. It's important to note that if you have a 3G phone after the shutdown, you won't be able to connect and you can't make emergency calls. I think that's pretty important to recognize. Some phones can be reconfigured, particularly some of those devices that are bought a little bit earlier, but can be configured. Just the Xiaomi ones I just talked about. I got a stat from the TCF that said there are, sorry, I just got to get the piece of paper. There are something like 1,500 different phone models on use on networks in New Zealand at the moment. The most popular is the iPhone 6 and then the Samsung Galaxy 7. So, and it goes all the way down to the Alcatel 1B, which is 10th. But there are 1,500 devices, and you might have bought one overseas, which is, I don't know, pink with unicorns and is shaped like a banana, which works at the moment, and it probably won't work going ahead. So that's sort of, gives you a sense of, and of those 1,500 devices, some of them may be only one or two. So it is quite an individualized situation problem. So what about us? So we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing, what we can do to help, but also why we're doing this webinar and why we want to talk to you and hear from you, and what sort of things we should be helping people with, and particularly with communities, and how we can help share the message, but also take that message back to the TCF and back to the MNOs. So I think I'm going to leave it there because I've probably talked too long, because I usually do. And I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to hand over to Vic.
Thanks, Craig. And yeah, there's a lot of jargon in this space, isn't there? And if you don't work in this industry, it must be really, really confusing for people. And so really appreciate the challenge of getting up to speed with the 3G shutdown. Now, like Craig, I'm going to share some slides. Hopefully, I've got the right ones loaded and you'll be able to see them. Can we see, Leala? Can you see my my slides? Have they come up? No. No. What's happened? Stop share and I'll try again. Sorry, technology problems. I'm really not the best at the doing the tech myself. You can see them now. That's fantastic. Thank you. So just for anyone who's new to this mahi, the Digital Equity Coalition Aotearoa was formed during essentially the first and second lockdowns, way back then. And the background to why this community came together, and it is a community of lots of organisations who are all out there working with citizens of Aotearoa on the challenges they have with digital technology and participating in our modern world. And so we've founded on a structure of collaborative working together. And we ran a hui with about 100 organisations to come up with the name of what we should call this organisation back then, 5 years ago. And so we are a coalition, and are funded by philanthropy with charitable outcomes. And our intent is to help everyone be digitally capable and armed in this modern world. And so we talk a little bit in jargon as well. We can talk about motivation, access being affordable connectivity, and the ability to use the internet and have an adequate amount of connectivity. It's not enough to have a prepaid phone plan to do your homework after school, for example. It's really hard to apply for a job with only a prepaid phone plan. So adequate connectivity, to have the skills that everyone needs to be able to participate in life in 2025 and beyond, to have trust in what's going on in the digital world, and to be safe and secure. So we use an acronym called MASK quite often, but I'm not going to use that today. But just to give you a bit of context of how this community, the DECA community, comes together. And from a 3G shutdown perspective, what we really want to do is help ensure, as Craig just identified, help ensure that all of you who are out there working directly with people, that you have the information you need, that you're armed with the information that you need, and that you know where to go to get help for your communities as well. And we want to be developing up some resources in the next few weeks to share with you. But first of all, we wanted to really understand what people knew about this 3G shutdown, because we've heard a lot of assertions come from some companies about, the messages out there, everyone knows how they're going to be impacted. And we were a little bit concerned about that because we were hearing different things. So we put a survey out, and many of you have already responded to that. So thank you to everyone who completed that survey. We know you're busy with your own mahi, and so this is an extra thing to ask you to give us some feedback on. What we learned about everyone who's responded so far is that 59% of you are working with older people, 52% with lower income households, 50% with Māori, 40% with Pacifica communities. Many of you, 40% with tamariki, 30% working in rural areas, and 17% with disabilities, and there are other segmentations. And I know many of you are working with multiples of those. We also got a really geographically diverse range of responses from people too. Waikato was the largest cohort. These are essentially in order of where around the New Zealand around Aotearoa people were that responded to the survey. So I just wanted to let you know that we've had a really great response from really diverse group of people who are working in the social impact space and out there working with communities from all over the country. So that's kind of what will help shape up the report that we produce out of this, and the messaging that we go back to the TCF and to those telcos that Craig was describing with some other acronym about, with the concerns that we're hearing. And Leala is going to reinforce that with some of the things that are happening directly in her community after I've finished speaking. So key themes and insights. So the first set of questions we asked you were about how aware are you of the 3G shutdown? And awareness was quite mixed, but concern was very high. So as you can see from here, 43% of respondents to the survey said that they were very aware, 36% somewhat, but concerningly, 21% were not aware at all before they've seen whatever messaging or shares they've had to get them lead to them filling in the survey. Everyone, however, seemed to be concerned. 53% of you are extremely concerned, and 43% are somewhat concerned about the impacts of the shutdown of 3G. So I'm the next bit of the slides, so I'm going to go through and to talk about that. But first of all, just a couple of examples of quotes that came through from folks that filled in the survey. And I really liked this one about, I feel like I'm usually in the know but I knew nothing of this. And a lot of people I speak to, when I mention that 3G is being shut down, or when I mention that Windows 10 is being de-supported from a Microsoft perspective, or when I talk about the implications of the proposed government social media ban for under 16s, a lot of people have kind of heard a little bit in the periphery, but they haven't actually heard any of the details. They don't know when these things are going to happen. So the 3G shutdown is looming large, and so we thought we would tackle that first, but we will continue with those other topics and run similar surveys in Hui so that we can get as much and be armed with as much information as we can be to advocate on behalf of all of you out there doing that mahi with communities. So I just thought I'd accentuate some of each of these set of results with some of the quotes that we had in that space. So who is most at risk? And this is according to all of you who have filled in the survey. Real concern about older people, particularly those using basic phones. And I know I have a mother-in-law who's in her mid-80s who can barely use her phone, gets really confused about her phone. It is a basic phone. It is 4G capable, so that's a good thing for her. But when I speak with her and her friends and people she goes to church with, they're all very confused about their phones. And so even things like texting to a number to find out if their phone is 4G capable, they just don't even understand or comprehend why they need to do that and what's going on. So that's why it's fantastic. There are so many community groups like yourselves that are involved in supporting them. A lot of the feedback was concerned about people facing financial barriers to upgrading. And one of the things that we're really keen to advocate for is mechanisms for providing people with a pathway to upgrading to a handset or a device that is 4G capable or 5G capable. But it's not just handsets we're talking about. We need to remember that there are other devices, medical devices, alarm systems in homes. There are all sorts of other things that are still. My smart meter for my electricity, I believe, is still running on 3G and needs to be upgraded. There are many other things that need to be upgraded so they will continue working. So this is really the spread of the concerns that people have about who is going to be most impacted by this shutdown. Others identified some other areas we hadn't really thought about, such as frontline workers and frontline workers who don't have 4G capable phones will be really important that they are able to continue to communicate. And those in areas with really unreliable infrastructure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And we will have a follow-on Hui to this one where we bring the Telecommunications Forum and potentially some of the telcos to talk about what their plans and intentions are to overcome some of the challenges where at your place, wherever you are, you might just see 3G as the only thing available on your phone. And so what are they going to be doing to ensure that when the shutdown happens, you will be connecting, even if your device is capable, you'll be connecting to a different network. So definitely the unreliable and poor infrastructure is an area that we want them to come and talk to everyone here about. Some of the key things and insights of what you're all concerned about. So the financial burden of upgrading, the lack of digital confidence or know-how, which is in that kind of skills area that I was talking about earlier, the loss of access to emergency calling. Now, this was a big thing in Australia. You may have seen in the news when they shut down their 3G, initially made this change, the 111 system or their equivalent of the 111 system, they had mass failures of the ability for people to call their emergency system. And people here are very concerned about that. So it's a very real issue that we need to ensure that we pass on these concerns and we get some direct answers as to what will happen differently here. And we're really lucky here in Aotearoa to have learnt from the Australian experience. Some additional concerns that have been put up that we're keen to explore further with the telcos is around the lack of trustworthy information that's out there, and Leala is going to talk quite directly to some of that about experiences of going into shops and the advice that people are getting, the gaps in mobile coverage, which I spoke about before, when you only see 3G is available on your phone, what's going to happen once 3G is shut down. And a lot of people are concerned about environmental impacts of e-waste, because there's going to be all these devices and smart meters and medical devices where the thing that they're currently using is going to have to be replaced, and what's happening to that e-waste. So that's another area that we're going to be taking up with a range of service providers to try and get some answers and some programs going. Some of the ongoing barriers that you've highlighted is that 3G is only part of the story. So limited access to affordable devices is obviously a key theme that's come through in everyone's answers from things, but generally digital literacy and confidence gaps are very high in your concerns. And to the example I made about my mother-in-law and just her inability to comprehend what we're talking about when we talk about different spectrums and different ways of connecting your phone, and whether your phone is capable of connecting with a different spectrum. A lot of you are concerned about the high cost of broadband or mobile data, and I met with Consumer New Zealand yesterday specifically to talk about that, and we're going to be collaborating on some activity in that space, because this is a broad concern for everyone in Aotearoa. Accessibility needs not being met, and this is an increasing concern that we at DECA are hearing, and is around for anyone who has any accessibility shortfalls or challenges, that many of these technology solutions, and including the government's plans to digitise everything, are not necessarily meeting the needs of those with accessibility needs. So another area that we're going to spin off some exploration around, and unreliable internet connections, which we know geographically around the country there are some very real infrastructure challenges. People also raise concerns around language barriers, tech being overwhelming, and limited support for secure, informed use. So there's a lot that's come out of this survey that's going to give DECA a really good program of work for other areas beyond the shutdown of 3G, for us to partner with other social impact groups and advocate to government and others in decision-making positions on how do we improve these situations. A very common concern that was raised that we saw throughout the survey, and I've pulled out this one quote, which is very good, is this issue around towns where there are very poor 4G and 5G access, when the only thing that you see on your phone is 3G. So what is going to happen for people who are in these parts of the country where there currently aren't 4G and 5G towers? And we will be going off and asking these questions of the Telecommunications Forum and the telcos, and we will bring them back to the table for a follow-up to answer this really important question, because I think that is, the overall theme is the thing people are most concerned about, the what will happen when it's shut down, but also the ability for people to update their handsets and their devices so that they can still continue to participate and overcome the cost challenges and others. So that's my really brief overview of the survey insights so far. If you haven't filled it in, the info is in the chat for you. There's a link in the chat for you to go and fill it in now. I'm sure everything that both Craig and I have just said has invoked some questions. Please pop them in the chat and we will try and address them now. Or if there are other areas that you feel that we haven't addressed through the survey results. And I want to hand over or invite Leala to speak with us now, because she has been really actively working with communities and feeding back to the DECA network of other organisations some of the challenges that she's been experiencing working with in her community, and I'm sure that many of you will relate to much of this. But Leala, do you want to give us a bit of an insight into what you've been experiencing out there?
Absolutely. Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Leala Faleseuga tōku ingoa. So my name is Leala Faleseuga, and I am the Digital Inclusion Librarian for Libraries Horowhenua. So, like many of us, frontline working directly with communities, and it's really just my privilege to serve my community through library programming that builds that digital resilience. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about what we're starting to see from our library floor, and some things that we might think are challenging. So I am based out of Levin, so that's the Horowhenua. So, probably a pretty good example of regional Aotearoa. We've got a few small town main centres and then large pockets of rural communities. So probably good 4G connectivity some places, and other places that might be a problem. The first thing I wanted to acknowledge was that getting the information out is really hard, and we often find that reaching those that need the information the most is often the hardest. And so we think that there are a lot of people that just, one, still don't understand that 3G is going, or two, if they've heard that, they don't understand what that means for them, or they don't have full comprehension of how that might affect them. And so, that's something that we are encountering. We are trying to utilise our existing networks that we have to deliver that message. So we do go out into the community and do outreach, particularly with our kaumātua and older adults. So we are taking the information, and now we've got the resources from the PTF. We've been taking those fact sheets. We're going to take them out and make sure people are even aware. We're also going to be doing advertised drop-in sessions to try and just get the 3D shutdown out in front of people, because I do think that a lot of people still just don't understand what it means for them. And we can offer them support with that, as can a lot of the other frontline workers that are here. I think one of the huge concerns for us is what then happens to people when they enter the retail space to upgrade their phone. And for us at the library, we often see some of our most vulnerable community members and older adults, or people who just don't have the confidence and comprehension to understand what they need when they go to upgrade their phones. And for a lot of people, they don't have the financial resources either. So myself and very lucky to have a services to older adults librarian here, and whose name is Henry, and we work together a lot out in our community in this digital equity mahi. So we did a little walk around of our providers in town, and I will say we are a small town, so it was something that was very doable for us in an hour. And we went to all of the providers who sold mobile phones. Firstly, we just wanted to see if they had any information about the 3D shutdown, which none of them did. So we gave them, the fact sheets and talked to them a lot about it. The salespeople predominantly all understood and knew, but there was just no visible information. And we also just wanted to gauge, putting ourselves in the shoes of our more vulnerable or elderly customers, what's it like to enter a retail space, and how easy is it to identify that you don't need the $1,000 phone. The $40 phone is 4G capable. The $100 phone is 4G capable, or even understanding how to choose, the phone that is the network that you need and stuff like that. And we did think it could be quite an overwhelming environment for people to enter. Unfortunately, what we were anecdotally finding is that people are going out into the retail space and coming back having been upsold devices that are far too expensive for them or not necessary for their needs. And we're really worried about who has the duty of care. And I think the answer is, at the moment, nobody. When people triggered by a shutdown like this are then sent out to try and upgrade their phones, often on their own, And who's got the responsibility to do right by them? Because we have already seen people come in who have had one lady who needed to go to MSD to get a grant for her phone, and then she went to a retailer and got a phone and was sold a phone that was not the network she needed. And when she went back to say, I need to return this, or this is wrong, she was told there was nothing that they could do. So she came to us and we did sort that out for her in the end, but she would never have been able to sort that issue out on her own. We've just had another example of one of our vulnerable customers who, through being, we were trying to inform her best we could, telling her she's got time, she doesn't need to run out and get a phone. But what happened is she has gone to one of our retailers and she's ended up with a phone that she's needed to finance. And that's wholly inappropriate for her needs. And when talking to some of the retailers, some of them very, listen and say, yes, we try to help people best they can. Some of them outright say, we don't have a responsibility. We're just, we're going to sell, when it's not our job to go through this or try and, fit the needs of the person to the phone. And so, yeah, unfortunately, this person has got a phone that is overprescribed for her and she has had to take finance out for. So, what happens when people enter the retail market to upgrade is another big concern that we have been thinking about and we've been seeing, and just not quite sure what the answer to that one is, but we are trying our best to help people from the floor, as I'm sure we all are, and helping them understand what this could mean for them. Yeah.
Thanks, Leala. I think one of my main observations in this post-COVID era is many folks like yourself whose role is back to work in a library context. And there are people I know on here who will probably come from food banks and from different kinds of community-facing organisations, whether they're focused on kai or housing or clothing or other activities for that people need, and are finding themselves becoming these digital kind of navigators to support their communities. How are you how are you finding across kind of the librarian network generally and others that you talk to in your spaces? Is this universally happening, or is this really just happening in the Horowhenua? Is that something you're seeing all around the country?
It's something that we see all around the country, and the library is one facet of frontline help, but it's not the only one. And so I think that wherever people come face to face with people in a capacity, particularly of helping, so we know libraries are welcoming spaces where people know they can get help, and other places, frontline services as well. They'll be sharing these concerns and worries, I think, universally, and we'll be seeing the need presenting itself in various different ways, whether it be being unsure how to get the best phone for you in a 3G shutdown, or getting the right internet connection for your home so you can apply for a job, and stuff like that.
Yeah, when I met with John Duffy from Consumer yesterday, we talked about all of these issues. I kind of came with the whole kete of these are all the issues that DECA, our community wants to tackle this year, and they are people being upsold not only on phone devices but also on laptops. I get high school principals calling me on a regular basis talking about, can you help us by putting together a guide which I need to put up on the DECA website so we can just share with everyone on which device is most appropriate for our learners at different age groups, because parents are going into stores, and no fault to the individual salesperson who's paid on commission, right? But they're selling them something that is probably fit for purpose if you're in year 12 and 13, but not when you're a 5-year-old. So so how can they arm parents? And often parents walking out of stores then paying something off on credit, exactly as you just described. there's a bit of insight. We're also going to be putting out, which I think everyone will find interesting, where one of our team has been calling the telcos and asking them what their, as a community digital advocate, what the options are for upgraded devices. And so we're going to put some insights of what we've learnt through that process. But thank you so much, Leala. I'm really conscious that we're nearly at the end of time because we booked this for 45 minutes. I want to thank everyone who's been popping things in the chat with links to different organisations around the motu that are offering services in this space. We know that there is some great mahi happening in different regional areas. We know that it's not ubiquitous and not, various services aren't being offered everywhere. We also know that all of us in this space, who are particularly for charities, not-for-profits, we're all struggling with government contracts to provide these services coming to an end and funding being tight, and we could run a whole other webinar on that, but we're here to talk about 3G. So Craig, will we quickly sum up with next steps?
Sure. Can I pick up a couple of things in the chat?
Yeah.
And just follow on from Leala. Just say that this is not as Vic said, this is not an uncommon problem where the people on the floor don't necessarily have all the information, even though the provider swears black and blue they've provided it. So all credit to you, Leala, for handing out information to your local companies. I think they should at least buy you a cup of coffee for that one. Yeah. And Sarah just put in about phones from overseas, maybe in a different language. Yes, that's a great comment, and something that probably we should think about. Yeah. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts, Vic.
Great. So from a next steps perspective, we'll leave the survey open until, let's say, Tuesday next week. So you've got about a week to complete it. If you haven't already, please share with other colleagues and organisations that you collaborate with, because we'd like to get as much insight as we possibly can. We'll put out a report back to all of you with the results of that survey. Craig and I will take that away and go and talk to the TCF. I know Claire, you're here. Thank you for listening. And to the telco providers about the insights that we've had from all of you. And then we will schedule a follow-up where they can come back and provide answers to the questions that you've all quite rightly posed. DECA will put up a resource page with some other resources people can use. We'll also share on there the TCF resources that are up already, because we know that for speaking to communities, you often need acronym-free language and a different kind of language, and also examples of how to navigate some different scenarios. So we will be putting those resources up and working closely with Craig and the TUANZ community on how do we best ensure that when 3G is shut down, everyone who needs to be able to participate in a digital world can still continue to participate, and as well as all of our collective mahi on how do we work through some of the other challenges. For all of you that are here, we'll treat you like a bit of a cohort and send you things out early and seek your feedback. That would be fantastic. But as I said, please share widely with others that you work with. And I'll hand back to Craig with that 30 seconds to go to say the last words.
Kia ora. So I'd also like to say thank you to everybody. There's a poll that's popped up. We thought we'd ask whether we'd achieved the outcome that we wanted, which was to be able to help you feel more informed. I'm with Vic. If you can get people to fill out our survey for us, that's great, because particularly when we talk to the providers, it's so much more powerful when we've got community voices behind what we're saying, and it's not just us speaking from our perspective. So thank you again, and really appreciate you taking your time over the lunch hour to be with us. So ka kite anō, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Oh, Nikki says, would you be able to send us the presentation slides?
Yep.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. No problems.
Thanks everyone. Ka kite. Have a
Ka
great
kite.
day.